On a Friday night, my girlfriend announced she'd cheated right in front of everyone I once called friends. They laughed while she tore me apart. But instead of breaking down, I walked out without a word. Because the best revenge isn't rage, it's becoming someone they'll never be worthy of again. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night, the kind that blurred into the dozens before it. I was 28, working tech support at a mid-sized company in Chicago, saving whatever I could to finally launch my own IT consulting business. Most nights, I came home late and headed straight to the garage where my half-finished Honda Civic waited. That car wasn't just a project, it was proof that even things that looked too far gone could still run if you refused to give up. Emma knew that about me. She'd known from the first day we met 3 years earlier in a coffee shop near campus. I'd asked about the book she was reading, and she looked up and told me with this casual certainty only depressed people read the bell jar in public. Then she smiled like she already knew I'd sit down and never leave. That was how we started, fast, intense, all in. We weren't flashy. No expensive dinners or exotic trips. She said she liked how grounded we were, how I made her feel steady when everything else in her life was chaos. Some nights, she'd bring me takeout to the garage and stay there for hours, passing me tools while I tried to get the engine to turn over. When I worried about money, she'd say, "One day you'll build something bigger than either of us can imagine." Back then, I believed her. But over time, something shifted. It didn't happen in one big argument or some dramatic betrayal. It was more like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor is ruined. Girls' nights out started happening more often. Then they turned into "don't wait up" texts. When she did come home, she'd slip into bed without speaking. I'd lie there awake, replaying every conversation in my head, wondering what I'd missed. She stopped asking about my plans for the business. If I brought it up, she'd wave it off. "You're always chasing something," she said once. "It's exhausting." She didn't say for who. After that, I stopped trying to convince her. I thought maybe she was stressed or tired of the long hours. I kept telling myself it would pass. That Friday, we were at Murphy's Tavern, the place everyone in our circle ended up eventually. It wasn't anything special, just cheap beer and old booths, but it was where we celebrated birthdays, promotions, and the occasional breakup. It never crossed my mind it was where she'd decide to end us too. We'd met a few friends there: Ben, my closest friend since high school, Maya, who used to call me her big brother, Chris, who'd crashed on my couch more times than I could count. We'd all known each other for years, and even when life pulled us in different directions, we still came back to that sticky corner booth. It was already late. Most of us were on our second or third round. The noise in the bar was that comfortable kind of loud, people laughing, music playing low. I just started telling Ben about a new contract I was trying to land when Emma cleared her throat. At first, I didn't think anything of it. She'd been quiet most of the night, staring at her phone between sips of her drink. But when I looked up, she was already turned toward me, and something in her expression made the air feel heavier. "I guess this is as good a time as any," she said, loud enough that the table went silent. I felt everyone's attention shift, the way it does when you sense a fight coming. I remember thinking she'd maybe decided to call it quits right there. In a way, I almost respected the honesty. But I wasn't ready for what came next. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice steady. "I cheated," she said. "And honestly, I needed a real man. Not someone who sits in a garage every night fixing a car that's never going to run." Nobody spoke. I could feel 6 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting to see if I'd explode or break down. Instead, I just sat there, almost numb. The words didn't feel like a surprise. More like something I'd known deep down but hadn't wanted to admit. Ben let out a low whistle and clinked his glass against hers. "Damn, girl," he said. "Savage. But honest." Maya shifted in her seat. "We all kind of saw this coming," she muttered. Even Chris wouldn't meet my eyes. I took in their faces one by one. People I trusted, who'd spent holidays with me, who'd leaned on me in their worst moments. Not a single one of them looked sorry. I realized then that they'd known. Maybe not all the details, but enough. Enough to think they were justified in picking her side. I thought about saying something. Demanding an explanation. Shouting at Ben or Maya or whoever else had decided my life was some joke to laugh at. But instead, I picked up my keys and stood. Emma smirked like she expected me to yell or storm out. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I looked at her, really looked, and saw what was behind it all, the emptiness she was trying to fill, the need to be applauded for burning everything down. I tossed my keys up, caught them without thinking. "Cool," I said, and nothing else. I walked out while they watched. As the door swung shut behind me, I heard the laughter start again, louder this time, like they were relieved it was over. But for me, it wasn't over. Not even close. I stepped into the cool night air and felt something shift. It wasn't rage, though maybe that would have been easier. It was clarity. That was the night I decided if they saw me as disposable, I'd become impossible to ignore. And it started the second I walked away. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights sliding past my windows like reminders of how small everything felt now. At some point, I pulled over near the lake, turned off the engine, and sat there with the silence pressing in. I replayed every moment in that bar, her smirk, Ben's toast, Maya's shrug, and it all crystallized into something sharp. They hadn't just watched her humiliate me. They'd enjoyed it. That was the part one couldn't shake. It wasn't that Emma had cheated, though that was bad enough. It was how eager they all were to watch her set fire to everything I thought we shared. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared out across the water and made a decision. If I'd spent years trying to be the steady one, the forgiving one, the guy who never complained, it had only taught them to see me as weak. And that was done. When I finally got home, the first thing I did was grab a trash bag. I filled it with everything that reminded me of her, old movie tickets, the coffee mug she always left on my counter, the small things you don't notice piling up until they feel like evidence. I dropped the bag in the dumpster behind the building. Inside, I opened my laptop and started deactivating everything. Social media, messaging apps, group chats gone. I didn't want to give them even a window into what came next. The next morning, my phone lit up with a single group text from Chris. "Hey man, hope there are no hard feelings. Let's all try to be mature about this." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without replying. Mature? That was the word he'd picked? Like I was supposed to sit there and nod while they laughed at me. I started by reaching out to my old professor, Dr. Klein, who'd once told me during office hours that I had the mindset to run my own company. He'd meant it as encouragement, but I'd let that idea sit on a shelf for too long. I emailed him at 6 in the morning, explaining what I was trying to build. Less than an hour later, he replied, "Good to hear from you. Let's catch up." That single line felt like a spark. That week, I enrolled in night classes for cybersecurity certifications. I'd been fixing networks for years, but I knew if I wanted to go further, I needed the credentials to back it up. I started waking up at 5 a.m. to run, even when my legs ached. I swapped fast food for meal preps and stuck to them. Every time I felt like quitting, I thought about Emma's voice. I needed a real man. I let it fuel me. At work, I stopped staying quiet. When a client escalated a problem, I volunteered to handle it. When my manager asked for someone to lead a new project, I raised my hand first. Each small win felt like proof that I hadn't been the problem in that relationship, I'd just outgrown it. In the evenings, I studied. At first, it was slow going, but the discipline started to build. I realized that while Emma and the rest were spending their nights in bars, I was building something solid. About a month after the breakup, I landed my first private contract. A local accounting firm needed their entire network overhauled. The pay wasn't huge, but it was enough to see the path forming in front of me. While I was working, I heard bits and pieces about them. Mutual acquaintances would mention that Emma was still with Caleb, the bartender she'd left me for. She was posting about how much happier she was. They all were still in the same places, doing the same things. I didn't check her profiles, but sometimes the updates found their way to me anyway, overheard at work, glimpsed in passing. Every time, I felt a pang, but it dulled a little more each week. 2 months in, I'd passed my first certification and was working 3 side contracts. I was exhausted in a way I'd never been, but it felt good. Real. I was finally proving to myself what I'd always suspected. I didn't need anyone's permission to build the life I wanted. Some nights, when the work was done, I'd lie on my back on the garage floor under the Civic, staring at the cracked ceiling. But instead of feeling stuck, I felt like I was finally moving. It was around then that the first messages started trickling in. "Ben, yo man, heard you're doing your own thing now. Respect. Maya, hey, just checking in. Hope you're okay." I ignored them. They didn't deserve access to this part of me. The part that refused to stay broken. 3 months after that night at Murphy's, I officially registered my LLC. I built a simple website and put together a proposal template. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone except Dr. Klein. Word spread anyway. One of my first clients recommended me to a larger agency. Within weeks, I had more work than I knew how to handle. I started turning down smaller contracts just to keep up. The money was good, but more than that, the work gave me something Emma never could. A sense that I was building a life on my own terms. At the end of that 3rd month, I took a walk along the same stretch of the lake where I'd sat after the breakup. The water was calm. For the first time in years, so was I. I realized I hadn't thought about Emma or any of them in days. I knew then that the version of me who walked out of Murphy's Tavern wasn't coming back. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt like a relief. By the time I hit the 6-month mark, I was a different person. The transformation wasn't instant. It happened in small, measurable steps. Running faster, signing bigger contracts, waking up each morning without the weight of someone else's disappointment hanging over me. I'd learned how to run my business from the ground up. I didn't have investors or mentors holding my hand. Every decision, from pricing proposals to negotiating contracts, fell on me. And the longer I stayed focused, the more clients came looking for help. One evening, I received an email from a regional healthcare group that had seen my work on a mutual contacts network upgrade. They wanted me to submit a bid to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. It was the kind of contract that could double my income overnight. I spent 3 days putting together a proposal so polished it felt like a thesis. When they accepted it, I sat at my desk, feeling a calm satisfaction I hadn't known I was capable of. While my business grew, so did my presence, quietly. I didn't post updates or make announcements, but my name started to circulate in professional circles. A few old coworkers reached out, curious about whether I was hiring or needed subcontractors. I kept my responses polite but brief. I wasn't interested in dragging any pieces of my old life into this one. By then, I'd dropped 20 pounds. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't spending money on things that didn't matter. My daily routine had become almost monastic. Work, run, study, sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and every part of it was mine. Around that time, Emma finally broke her silence. The first message came late on a Tuesday night. "Hey, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to say I'm sorry." I read it once and put my phone face down on the table. It stayed there until the next morning. When I picked it up again, there were 3 more messages stacked underneath. "I really messed up. You didn't deserve any of it. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if it was pity she wanted or forgiveness she hadn't earned. Over the next week, the messages kept coming. Emma shifted from apology to nostalgia to desperation, sometimes in the same paragraph. She wrote about our first apartment, about the garage where I'd spent all those hours fixing the Civic, about how she never thought I'd actually leave. I didn't reply to any of it. Instead, I focused on work. The healthcare contract was more demanding than anything I'd done before. I spent late nights double-checking security protocols and rewriting documentation so it was airtight. Every time my phone buzzed, I ignored it. One afternoon, I stopped by a local networking event to meet with a potential client. As I walked into the venue, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass doors. It struck me that if Emma had been there, she wouldn't have recognized me. And even if she did, I knew she wouldn't have understood the person she was seeing. 2 days later, Maya texted, "Hey stranger, you look amazing. I've seen some of the photos from the charity run. Are you okay?" That was the first I realized people had started tagging me in event photos. Even though I hadn't posted anything myself, the evidence of my new life was starting to leak back into the old one. After Maya came Ben. "Yo man, real talk, we all handled that night badly. You didn't deserve it." And then Chris. "Your name came up at a client lunch. They said you're the best in the city. You killing it. Proud of you, dude." I scrolled through each message with a strange, detached curiosity. If you told me a year ago that they'd be the ones reaching out first, I wouldn't have believed you. But I still didn't answer, because by then, I understood that my silence wasn't passive. It was the only response that made sense. One evening, I received the message that shifted everything. "Emma again. Caleb and I broke up. He cheated on me. I feel like an idiot. I thought he was exciting, but he turned out to be just another mistake." I read it 3 times, waiting for some reaction. Anger, satisfaction, anything. But all I felt was indifference. 2 days later, she tried calling. I watched the screen light up and let it ring. She called again the next day. Then the next. After the 6th attempt, she switched back to texting. "I miss who I was when I was with you. I'm sorry for everything. Can you please just talk to me?" That was the moment I realized she wasn't reaching out because she wanted to fix what she'd broken. She was reaching out because she didn't know how to face the consequences of her choices. I thought about replying. I even drafted a few sentences. But each time, it felt like I was being pulled back into a life I'd outgrown. While she and the others were still orbiting the same bars, posting the same filtered photos, I was signing contracts with clients who didn't care who I'd been a year ago. They only cared about who I was now and what I could deliver. And that, I realized, was the difference. They wanted validation. I'd built something real. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run along the lake. The air was cold enough to sting, but I kept moving. With each mile, the distance between who I'd been and who I'd become grew a little wider. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table, opened Emma's last message, and read it one final time. Then I deleted the entire thread and blocked her number. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, because the real climax wasn't about revenge. It was about closing the door without needing to slam it. It was about knowing I'd never again be the man who waited around to be chosen. And that was worth everything. After I blocked Emma's number, the messages didn't stop. They just changed form. She started emailing me instead. The first subject line was just please. I didn't open it. The next morning, there were 2 more. I'm sorry, and can we talk? I set up a filter that sent anything from her address straight to the archive. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because every time I saw her name on my screen, I felt the old pull to explain myself, to reassure her that she hadn't broken me as badly as she thought. And I was done spending energy on that. Around that same time, Maya tried calling. She didn't leave a voicemail, but she sent a long text a few minutes later. I know you probably never want to hear from me again. I was a coward that night. You were always the real one. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you're okay. I read it twice before putting my phone back in my pocket. I didn't feel anger toward her anymore, but I also knew I couldn't trust her again, and that was enough to keep my response simple. Nothing. Ben's message came later that week. Bro, I was wrong about everything. She told us a lot of stuff that wasn't true. I'm sorry for not having your back. I wondered if he even realized how empty that sounded. He hadn't needed her stories to know what kind of person I was. He'd seen it for years, and when it mattered, he chose entertainment over loyalty. While they were all reaching out, I was busy working on the largest project I'd ever landed. A security overhaul for a tech startup that had just secured funding. It required long hours, detailed documentation, and constant meetings with their leadership team. I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed it. Every milestone was another reminder that I was no longer the guy they thought they could laugh out of the room. One Friday evening, I wrapped up work early and stopped by the grocery store. As I stood in line, I got another message from an unknown number. This is Caleb. I'm sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve that. I stared at the screen, feeling something close to disbelief. Caleb, the man Emma had traded me for, was reaching out. I didn't reply. There was nothing he could say that would matter. After that, the messages slowed down. Emma stopped trying to call. I heard from a mutual contact that she'd moved back in with her parents temporarily. The relationship she'd built with Caleb had ended badly. Apparently, he'd been cheating on her with a coworker. She was out of money and out of places to go. I didn't take pleasure in hearing it. I didn't feel vindicated. Mostly, it just reinforced what I already knew. People who treat loyalty like an option usually end up learning how rare it really is. The next few months were some of the most productive of my life. I signed 2 new contracts, hired my first employee to handle smaller accounts, and finally finished restoring the Civic. The engine turned over on the first try, and I sat behind the wheel for a long time, listening to it idle. That night, I took the car out for a drive. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just wanted to see how far I could go without looking back. About halfway through the drive, I stopped at a gas station. As I was filling the tank, I noticed a car pull up at the pump across from me. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman who stepped out. She looked tired, older somehow. It took a few seconds before I realized it was Emma. She saw me too. For a split second, she looked like she might pretend she didn't. But then she raised a hand in a small wave. I nodded once and turned back to my car. She crossed the space between us anyway. Hey, she said quietly. I didn't respond. I know you don't owe me anything, she continued. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at her then. Not the way I used to, searching for some sign that she still cared, but the way you look at someone you used to know and don't anymore. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally. Her shoulders dropped a little, like she'd been holding her breath. I was wrong, she said. About you. About everything. I didn't feel the need to correct her or to make her feel worse. There was nothing left to salvage. Take care of yourself, I said, and that was it. I got back in my car and drove away. As I merged onto the highway, I felt something unhook inside me, like the last piece of that old life had finally come loose. In the following weeks, my business kept growing. I was featured in a local business magazine as a success story, someone who'd started from scratch and built something sustainable. My old coworkers sent congratulations. Even Chris, who'd been silent for months, reached out to say he was impressed. I didn't reply to any of them. One morning, I woke up to an email from a venture capital group interested in investing in my company. They wanted to set up a meeting to discuss potential expansion. I accepted without hesitation. I didn't need anyone's permission to grow. That night, I sat on my couch, scrolling through the contract I'd signed, and realized that the life I'd built had no room for bitterness. Not because I was above it, but because it had simply stopped being relevant. The consequences of Emma's choices had finally caught up to her. But the consequences of mine had built me into someone I actually respected. And that was all I ever wanted. The meeting with the investors happened on a rainy Thursday morning. I showed up early, carrying a thin folder with every document they'd asked for. As I sat in the conference room waiting for them to arrive, I thought about how different my life looked compared to a year earlier. Back then, I'd been trying to convince Emma that the life I wanted was worth building slowly. I'd been surrounded by people who mistook consistency for weakness. That version of me wouldn't have believed I could sit across from a group of venture capital partners negotiating terms on my own company's expansion. When the meeting started, I felt calm, focused. They asked about my goals, my revenue, the growth I'd achieved without any outside funding. They seemed surprised by how much I'd built quietly without advertising or constant self-promotion. At the end, one of them closed his binder and looked me in the eye. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time," he said. "What motivated you to make such a drastic change?" It was a fair question. I could have told them about the betrayal, the bar that night, the way everything I thought was stable had collapsed. But none of that felt relevant anymore. I just decided it was time to stop waiting for someone to believe in me, I said. So I did it myself. They nodded, satisfied. We shook hands, and I walked out into the rain feeling lighter than I had in years. A week later, the investment was finalized. My company had a new influx of capital, enough to hire more staff and expand our services statewide. For the first time, I allowed myself a small celebration, a quiet dinner alone, not to mark revenge but to acknowledge how far I'd come. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my office door. My first instinct was that it was a contract or invoice someone had delivered early. But when I picked it up, I recognized Emma's handwriting immediately. Inside was a letter. "I know you've probably blocked me everywhere by now. I understand why. I'm not writing to ask for another chance. I just wanted you to know that losing you made me realize who I am without you, and it's not someone I respect. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. For how I tried to make you feel small so I wouldn't have to admit that I felt inadequate. You deserve better. I hope you find everything you were working for. Emma." I read it twice, searching for any flicker of the old ache. There was nothing left. Only the quiet acknowledgement that she'd finally seen what I'd known all along. Sometimes people hurt you because they can't face themselves. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but because it no longer had the power to disrupt anything I'd built. In the following months, my life took on a steady rhythm. My business kept growing. I brought on 2 full-time employees. I even started mentoring a few younger professionals who reminded me of myself when I was just starting out, eager, hungry, unaware of how quickly things could change. Sometimes people asked if I ever regretted the years I'd spent in that relationship. I didn't. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't have learned how much I was capable of on my own. One evening, as I was locking up the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "Just wanted to say I'm glad to see you doing so well. We all thought you'd be the one to fall apart, and you turned out to be the strongest of all of us." I didn't reply, but I didn't feel angry either. It was the final proof that I'd outgrown their expectations. Months turned into a year. The Civic I'd spent so many nights fixing was finally road-ready. On a Saturday morning, I took it out for a long drive along the interstate. The engine was smooth, the ride steady. For the first time, it didn't feel like something I was trying to fix, it just felt like a vehicle carrying me forward. When I pulled over at a rest stop, I thought about how far I'd come since the night Emma announced she'd cheated. Back then, I believed the worst thing you could experience was public humiliation. I thought the shame would swallow me whole. But I've been wrong. The worst thing wasn't being laughed at. It was believing that other people's approval determined my worth. Once I stopped caring about their validation, everything changed. Standing beside my car, I finally understood that revenge didn't have to be about payback or bitterness. Real revenge was becoming someone so complete, so content, that the people who hurt you no longer had any place in your story. I didn't need Emma's regret. I didn't need Ben's respect or Maya's guilt. I had my work, my independence, and the certainty that I would never again let anyone decide how much I mattered. When I got back in the car and started the engine, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. Not because everything had turned out perfectly, but because I was no longer waiting for closure from people who didn't deserve to give it. I drove home with the windows down, thinking about the simple truth I wished I'd understood sooner. By the time they realize your worth, you've already built a life too big for them to enter. That was the final lesson. And I was finally ready to leave the rest behind.